Hello and welcome. During this video, we are going to walk through the recommended workflow for entering in client data if you are in the client advocate or non-medical role at your center. In the next video, we'll walk through the recommended workflow for entering in client data if you're in a medical role at your center. Before we get started, let's refer back to this diagram that we discussed in the previous video. You can think of all of this information consisting of the client file, the client case, and all other related client forms as the client's electronic chart, similar to the paper folder where you keep all of the client's medical forms, consent forms, and other information. Now let's talk about how this information is entered into CenterPiece. The first thing that needs to be entered in order to start the client's electronic chart is the client file. The client file is typically entered in through the scheduler when a new client is checked in at your center. Once the client file is created, the next step is to enter in all of the information about her case and the specific services she received during her visit to your center. All of this information is entered in through the quick form, and there are two different ways that it's done. Either manually if your center is using paper forms, or electronically if your center is using mobile intake. During this video, I'm going to walk you through both ways. So let's go ahead and get started. Notice that I'm here in the scheduler within the Office module and I have two appointments. I'm going to click here to collapse the taskbar and notice that neither client has been checked in. Also notice that this client has not returned any mobile forms because none were sent, and this client has. We'll begin by walking through the manual workflow for this client who has not returned any mobile forms and is instead using paper forms. To begin the process, we'll first check her in from the scheduler, and after that, we'll complete the data entry by entering in the information that was collected on her paper office forms. Now, before you can start this process, you will of course need to set up and print out all of your paper office forms. If you haven't yet set up and printed out your office forms, you can find them by clicking on the Client tab and then on Office Forms. Notice the 4 different forms right here. Now there is some setup that you'll need to complete in order to customize the forms for your office. We walk through the entire process of setting up and printing out the office forms in the Office Forms videos, which you can find in the Video Training Center in the Help section. Also, you'll want to be sure and use the eKairos forms here because these paper forms will match the data entry screens in CenterPiece, so it will make data entry much easier and quicker. Okay, so let's go ahead and move on with our example and go back to the scheduler. Again, let's refer back to our diagram and remember that the first step in creating the client's electronic chart is to create the client file. This is typically done by the receptionist when the client is checked in. So let's say that Sally has arrived for her appointment and I need to check her in. To do that, I'll simply click Edit on her appointment and then I'll select Show from the Status drop-down. Next, I'm going to search for the client's last name to see if she already has a client file. Entering one or more letters of her last name will filter the list with names that match the criteria. Now, since she has a common last name and there are several clients in our database who match the search criteria, I'm going to go ahead and type a comma and then the first letter of her first name, which in this case is an S, and this will filter my list even further. After doing that, I can see that her client file is not in the system, so I'll need to create a new file for her by clicking here on the ellipsis button. The new client file form will open, and notice the information from her appointment form has been autofilled, including her name, phone number, and birth date. Since we're just checking the client in and not completing her paperwork at this point, we'll just click Save and Close, and then Save and Close on the appointment form. The scheduler will refresh and notice that her status has been changed to Show, telling us that she showed up for her appointment and was checked in. Okay, so let's now move on to the data entry process. We'll say that Sally Green has finished her appointment and we're ready to process and input the paper forms from her visit. To begin the manual data entry process, click on the Client tab. And then I'm going to go ahead and click here to expand the taskbar so I can see the available tasks. And next I'll click on the Intake Quick Form button. The first step here is to search for the client's file. To do that, I'll simply enter in a few letters of her last name and a few letters of her first name, and I'll click Search. Any clients who match the search criteria will be displayed, and you can see her file right here. Now, if for some reason the receptionist didn't create a client file, you can easily create a new client file by clicking right here. Since our client's file is already in the system, we'll click here to add intake to this client file. Next, the system will search to see if there are any existing cases for this client. Remember that a case simply represents a new pregnancy or new cycle of support. You can see that there are no cases, so we'll click here to create a new case. Once clicked, the quick form is launched. The first section of the quick form is the contact information form. In order to fill this out, I would take her contact information paper form and transfer the information from her paper form to the fields on this form. Again, by using the eKairos forms, this process is much easier because the paper forms will be in the same order as the forms here in CenterPiece. Okay, so since her name, phone number, and date of birth are already filled out from the check-in process, all we need to do is add any information from her paper forms. I'm going to quickly fill out her address information. I'll type in the city and then state, the zip, and the country. Next, I'll fill out her email, and I'll scroll down a bit and select her sex and then her ethnicity. And again, all of this is based on the information in the paper forms. Here in the comment section, I'm going to go ahead and put an emergency contact person. I'll just type in Donna Miller, who's her mother, and I'll type in her phone number. Now, during this demo, I'm not going to go over each and every field on these forms because it would take too long, but you can get detailed information about all of the fields on these different forms in the online user guide in the Help module. So I'd encourage you to review that after this video. I'm going to scroll down and notice this blue ribbon right here. The quick form displays all of the different intake forms together, and this blue ribbon displays the title of the next form, the case form. Since this is a new case, there is no information on this form. If this client already had a case and I selected to add the intake forms to that case earlier in the process, the information already recorded about the case would be displayed here and I could make any necessary changes to the data. Since this is a new case, however, I will need to take the paper case intake form and begin transferring the information from the paper forms to the form here in CenterPiece. I'm going to fill out the first part of this form. I'll make sure the date is correct, and that's the date that she visited the center, so I'll leave it as is. Next, I'll leave the status as open, and I'll leave the center location as Arlington. For the originating volunteer, let's assume that I'm the volunteer who met with her, so I'll leave my name here, but if you needed to change it, you can do that. Next, I'm going to quickly fill out the demographics section. I'll first select her income level, then her marital status. Next, I'll select what she put as her religion, then her student status, then the highest level of education that she completed, and lastly, I'll type in her zip code. Next, I'm going to scroll down and fill out the office use only section. Now, the office use only section will not be displayed on the paper forms that the client sees, but instead these answers are recorded in the office use only form that the volunteer or staff member fills out after the visit. Again, the office forms video will go over all of this information in detail and show you how to print out the client office forms and the office use only form. So please refer to those videos for help on that. For this section, I would take the office use only paper form and begin transferring the information. Notice this first section includes an abortion risk assessment. I'll select that she is abortion vulnerable and that she stated she's undecided. Next, there is a spiritual assessment section. I'll select that the gospel was presented and that I am unsure of her spiritual status. And the last section is an abstinence assessment. I'll select that she did not make a commitment to abstinence. Okay, so the next form we come to is the visit form. This is where we can record the day she visited the center, the primary purpose of her visit, and I'll select pregnancy test, and the office location where she visited. You can also select who was with her during the visit. I'll select that no one was with her, and I'm not going to click here because this was an actual visit and not a virtual visit. Okay, so next we're going to begin to add the specific activity forms that represent the services she received during her visit. To add these forms, all we need to do is place a check mark next to the form we wish to add. Okay, so let's say that I met with her to discuss her concerns. So I'll need to fill out a concepts shared form. I'll select that I shared with her about the gospel and options counseling. And if I needed to make any changes to this selection criteria, I could do that by clicking here on the Edit List button. To add my selections, I'll simply click Apply. Next, let's say that I have some notes about our visit. To record these notes, I simply need to click here on the Note ribbon. The form will open and I can type in my visit notes. Now, this isn't a medical note, so I won't check here. And notice that I can choose to lock the note if I want. If I lock the note, no one except me will be able to edit or delete it. I'll go ahead and lock it, and the next form we need to add to her electronic chart is a pregnancy test form. To do that, I'll click on the pregnancy test form and the form is opened. Again, I'm not going to cover every field, but I am going to quickly fill out her LMP, and then I'll scroll down to the bottom of the form and fill out the office use only section again. I'll leave the test results as positive, and I'm going to click here to calculate her due date from her LMP. I'll select that she is abortion vulnerable and that she stated she's undecided. Notice that I can also lock the pregnancy test form. I'll go ahead and click here to lock that. And lastly, let's say that I gave her a referral to an OBGYN. To record that, I'll click on the Outside Referrals ribbon, and then I'll select the doctor right here. Okay, so at this point, I'm finished recording all of the information about the client and about the services she received. Let's quickly refer back to our electronic chart diagram, and you can see that we created the client file when we checked her in, and then here in the quick form, we've created the case visit, and we've entered in all of the activity forms that represent the services she received at the center. I'm now ready to save all of these forms to her electronic chart. I have a few different options for saving. I can choose to save and print the forms. I can choose to save and open, which will save the forms and go to the client's electronic chart, or I can save in new if I want to enter in a new set of intake forms. Let's go ahead and click Save and Open. The forms are saved and were taken into the client's electronic chart. Notice her contact information here at the top, and notice the case that we just entered right here. You can see her abortion vulnerability status right here, and if I click on the Activity tab, notice that all of these forms that we entered in are listed under case number 1, which is the new case that we just created. You can see the visit form here and the different activity forms. To make any edits to any of the forms, all I would need to do is click on Edit to open the form. Then after making the changes, I'd just click Save and Close. Now, in addition to the paper intake forms, you will most likely also have some read and sign consent forms that need to be scanned and then uploaded to the client's chart. And since we aren't using the mobile intake digital forms, we're going to have to scan in the signed paper documents. So let's assume that I've already scanned in Sally's signed consent forms. To add them to her file, I'm going to click on the Documents tab, and then I'll click Attach Files. Notice the different types of files that are supported. For our example, let's say that Sally read and signed the HIPAA consent for privacy form and the request for services form. I'll click on Select and browse to where I saved the files. Next, I'll click on the first file, and then I'll hold the Control key down and click on the second file to select them both. I'll click Open and then Save and Close. Notice the files are added right here. I'll click on this one to download it and you can see the signed form. Okay, well, that completes the workflow for manually inputting information from the paper forms into the client's electronic chart. For more information about adding a profile pic, tracking the client's abortion vulnerability, and adding other things such as children and relationships to the client's electronic chart, please watch the rest of the videos in the Client Data Entry Showcase. You can find the link to the showcase in the Video Training Center in the Help module. Next, let's walk through the electronic workflow for client data entry by processing the mobile intake forms returned by our second example client. To get started, let's go back to the scheduler by clicking on Office and then on Scheduler. I'll once again click to collapse the taskbar, and the first thing we need to do is again check our client in. To do that, I'll once more click Edit on the appointment form, and then I'll select Show right here. Notice that her client file has already been created and added to the appointment form, so I just need to click Save and Close. Now also notice that Lola Miller has already returned her intake forms digitally. This is because the forms were sent to her prior to her appointment and she completed them through the mobile intake application. I'm going to click here on the word returned, and I can see that Lola was sent the contact information form, the case intake information form, the pregnancy test form, and then 2 read and sign consent forms, the HIPAA consent for privacy form and the request for services form. Because she already completed these forms before her visit, all I need to do is review what she filled out online through the quick form and add any additional information that was gathered during her visit. So let's assume that Lola has finished her appointment and we are ready to process her mobile intake forms and add any additional information that was collected during her visit. To begin the data intake process, we aren't going to click on the Client tab like we did for the manual process. Instead, we're going to click on the Mobile Intake tab from within the Office module. Notice Lola's name right here, and the status says that she's returned her forms. I'll click to open the row details, and the first thing you see is a list of the forms that were returned. You can see that she returned the contact information form, the case intake information form, the pregnancy test form, and 2 read and sign consent forms, the HIPAA consent for privacy and the request for services. Okay, so the first step in processing these forms is to see if Lola already has a case in the system that I want to add these forms to. I'll click here and notice that she does not have a case in the system. If she did have a case, then I could select to add these forms to that case if I wanted, but since she doesn't have a case, I'm going to leave this blank and these forms will be applied to a new case. I'll click Start Intake and notice that the same form, the quick form that we saw during the last intake process, is loaded. This time, however, because Lola filled out the forms digitally, all I have to do is review it. You can see that she filled out all of her contact information, and then if I scroll down to the case form, you can see that all of her information was also filled out here, her demographics, partner information, etc. The only thing that I need to fill out is the office use only section. I'll quickly fill out that Lola is likely to carry, and she already marked on her intake forms that she intends to carry. I'll also mark that the gospel was presented and that she's already a Christian. Next, I'll select that she did make a commitment to abstinence. This next form here is the visit form. I'll need to select the primary purpose of the visit, which was a pregnancy test, and I'll also select that her boyfriend came with her to the visit. Next, notice here that the pregnancy test is already checked and opened for me to review the information because she filled out the pregnancy test form digitally. I can scroll down and review this information, and again, I'll quickly fill out the office use only section. Notice that her due date is already filled out. I'll quickly select that she is likely to carry and that she stated she intends to carry. I'm also going to go ahead and lock this form. And down here at the bottom, notice that she signed and returned 2 digital consent forms, the HIPAA consent for privacy and the request for services. Through mobile intake, you can create custom read and sign consent forms that the client can read and then digitally sign. These forms will be added to the client's file under the Documents tab, so there's no need for you to scan anything in. They are automatically attached to the Documents tab when you process the forms. I can quickly expand this one so you can see the text, and I'll expand this next one and you can see the text on this next one. Notice that she has signed both of them. Okay, so now let's say that during her visit, I was the person who met with Lola and I spoke to her about fetal development and discussed the gospel with her. I'll want to record that information as well, and to do that, I'll scroll back up and click on the Concept Shared ribbon. The form will open and I just need to select fetal development. Oops, let me scroll up a bit and select that, and gospel discussion. I'll click Apply, and that's it. We are done with Lola's forms. As you can see, the intake process is much faster when using mobile intake. In addition to speeding up the data entry process, mobile intake also reduces data entry errors because I'm not having to manually enter data from paper forms. And the quick form allows me to review all of the information that the client submitted before saving it to her client chart. Okay, so once again, I'm going to click Save and Open, and we're taken into her electronic chart. Notice that her case is right here, and we can see her pregnancy intentions here. If I click Open on the case, and I'm going to go ahead and close this contact information, and you can see her case information right here. Then if I click on the Activity tab, you can see the other forms that we entered for this case: the visit form, the concept shared form, and the pregnancy test form. Then I also want to show you her signed consent forms. I'll click back on the Case List tab and then on the Documents tab, and you can see her signed consent forms right here. I'll click Download to see a copy, and notice the digital signature with the Secure Signature ID right here. I'll close out of this, and that's it. Now again, these two different workflows that I reviewed for you are the different ways that we recommend doing data entry, but you certainly don't have to follow these workflows. The software is set up to be very flexible and allow you to enter data the way that works best for you and your center. For instance, I'm going to go ahead and click to open the taskbar, and notice that you can enter in forms right here from within the client file. For example, let's say that I want to add a note to Lola's file. To do that, I'll simply select Note. The note form will open, and I'll quickly type in my note. I'm going to go ahead and lock the note so no other users can edit it, and then I'll click Save and Close, and the note has been added to her chart. So as you can see, there are many different ways to add data. Okay, in summary, during this video, you learned that the client file is usually created in the scheduler when the receptionist checks a new client in for their appointment. You also learned that our recommended workflow is to add intake forms to the client chart via the quick form. If you're recording information from paper forms, you learned that you access the quick form from the client module and you manually complete the quick form based on the paper forms. And if you're processing digital forms that the client completed via mobile intake, you learned that you access the quick form through the mobile intake inbox, and the quick form is automatically updated from the digital forms that the client completed. You learned that by using mobile intake, your data entry process is much faster and there are less errors as you're simply reviewing information entered in by the client. You also learned that you can easily add any additional forms right from within the client's chart. I hope these suggested workflows will help you create your client's electronic chart accurately and efficiently. If you have a medical role at your center, I recommend that you watch the data entry for medical personnel video next. If you do not have a medical role at your center, your next step would be to watch the next video in this series, Tracking Abortion Vulnerability Through the At-Risk Timeline. And after that, continue on with the rest of the videos in the Client Data Entry Showcase. In addition, during this video, I referenced the Office Forms videos that will help you in setting up and printing out the paper office forms. I also referenced the mobile intake videos that will walk you through setting up your digital forms and setting up mobile intake. Both of these video series can be found here in the Video Training Center under the Help tab. Thanks for your time.